Today in class you got to experience what it was like to live in France before the Revolution. Now let's take a look at the actual background knowledge. Before the Revolution you had the old regime. It was ruled by King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Louis XVI was French, but Marie Antoinette was not. She was Austrian. Her father had traded her to marry Louis in exchange for peace between Austria and France. That was kind of a common thing that they did back then. Now, Louis's father had spent a lot of money. He built this place called Versailles Palace. It was a place for the royal family to live. Paris, at the time, was full of peasants, and that just was not a place for the king, queen, and the rest of the royal family to live. So, the palace was where they would stay. It was far enough to keep away from the peasants, but yet close enough to go into town if their servants needed to get something. Inside Versailles Palace, you had rooms that were made of gold. You had gardens that went on for miles. And they had a lot of fancy parties for all the nobles. During the old regime, there were 3 classes of people. These classes were called estates. In the first estate were the clergy. These were people like priests and nuns. The second estate was the nobility. These are a privileged class. They were actually allowed to spend 6 months of every year living at Versailles Palace with the royal family. This third estate was everyone else. The third estate was full of all kinds of people. It represented the poor and the middle class. You had bakers, doctors, and lawyers all in this class. It was 97 to 98% of the population. As you can see, it was a very unfair system. But so were the taxes. Even though the third estate was the poorest, they still paid the highest percentage of their wealth to taxes. Does this seem fair to you? During the reign of Louis, the country suffered extreme debt. They were in debt because they were involved in numerous wars. The queen was spending a lot of money on clothes. She never wore the same dress twice. And remember, life at Versailles Palace was expensive. They had to do a lot of fancy parties for all those nobles. Now, to try and solve this debt crisis, King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General. It gathered together representatives from all 3 estates. Unfortunately, the first and second estate, remember the clergy and the nobility, were unwilling to allow the third estate into the room because they knew the third estate's plan to fix the debt was by making all of the estates pay taxes based on how much money they had. This seemed like a fair system to them, but the first and second estate did not want to have to pay more taxes. Because of this, the third estate was locked out of the room and told to go home. Of course they didn't do that. This meeting had been held at Versailles Palace, which had many other rooms to choose from. So the third estate broke into a nearby room, which happened to be an indoor tennis court. While inside this room, the people vowed that they would not leave until they had created a new constitution. Therefore, this was named the Tennis Court Oath, and is the official start to the French Revolution. Today in class you got to experience what it was like to live in France before the Revolution. Now let's take a look at the actual background knowledge. Before the Revolution you had the old regime. It was ruled by King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Louis XVI was French, but Marie Antoinette was not. She was Austrian. Her father had traded her to marry Louis in exchange for peace between Austria and France. That was kind of a common thing that they did back then. Now, Louis's father had spent a lot of money. He built this place called Versailles Palace. It was a place for the royal family to live. Paris, at the time, was full of peasants, and that just was not a place for the king, queen, and the rest of the royal family to live. So, the palace was where they would stay. It was far enough to keep away from the peasants, but yet close enough to go into town if their servants needed to get something. Inside Versailles Palace, you had rooms that were made of gold. You had gardens that went on for miles. And they had a lot of fancy parties for all the nobles. During the old regime, there were 3 classes of people. These classes were called estates. In the first estate were the clergy. These are people like priests and nuns. The second estate was the nobility. These are a privileged class. They were actually allowed to spend 6 months of every year living at Versailles Palace with the royal family. This third estate was everyone else. The third estate was full of all kinds of people. It represented the poor and the middle class. You had bakers, doctors, and lawyers all in this class. It was 97 to 98% of the population. As you can see, it was a very unfair system. But so were the taxes. Even though the third estate was the poorest, they still paid the highest percentage of their wealth to taxes. Does this seem fair to you? During the reign of Louis, the country suffered extreme debt. They were in debt because they were involved in numerous wars. The Queen was spending a lot of money on clothes. She never wore the same dress twice. And remember, life at Versailles Palace was expensive. They had to do a lot of fancy parties for all those nobles. Now, to try and solve this debt crisis, King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General. It gathered together representatives from all 3 estates. Unfortunately, the first and second estate, remember the clergy and the nobility, were unwilling to allow the third estate into the room because they knew the third estate's plan to fix the debt was by making all of the estates pay taxes based on how much money they had. This seemed like a fair system to them, but the first and second estate did not want to have to pay more taxes. Because of this, the third estate was locked out of the room and told to go home. Of course they didn't do that. This meeting had been held at Versailles Palace, which had many other rooms to choose from. So the third estate broke into a nearby room, which happened to be an indoor tennis court. While inside this room, the people vowed that they would not leave until they had created a new constitution. Therefore, this was named the Tennis Court Oath, and is the official start to the French Revolution. Today in class, you got to experience what it was like to live in France before the Revolution. Now let's take a look at the actual background knowledge. Before the Revolution, you had the old regime. It was ruled by King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Louis XVI was French, but Marie Antoinette was not. She was Austrian. Her father had traded her to marry Louis in exchange for peace between Austria and France. That was kind of a common thing that they did back then. Now, Louis's father had spent a lot of money. He built this place called Versailles Palace. It was a place for the royal family to live. Paris, at the time, was full of peasants, and that just was not a place for the king, queen, and the rest of the royal family to live. So, the palace was where they would stay. It was far enough to keep away from the peasants, but yet close enough to go into town if their servants needed to get something. Inside Versailles Palace, you had rooms that were made of gold. You had gardens that went on for miles. and they had a lot of fancy parties for all the nobles. During the old regime, there were three classes of people. These classes were called estates. In the first estate were the clergy. These were people like priests and nuns. The second estate was the nobility. These are a privileged class. They were actually allowed to spend 6 months of every year living at Versailles Palace with the royal family. This third estate was everyone else. The third estate was full of all kinds of people. It represented the poor and the middle class. You had bakers, doctors, and lawyers all in this class. It was 97 to 98% of the population. As you can see, it was a very unfair system. But so were the taxes. Even though the third estate was the poorest, they still paid the highest percentage of their wealth to taxes. Does this seem fair to you? During the reign of Louis, the country suffered extreme debt. They were in debt because they were involved in numerous wars. The Queen was spending a lot of money on clothes. She never wore the same dress twice. And remember, life at Versailles Palace was expensive. They had to do a lot of fancy parties for all those nobles. Now, to try and solve this debt crisis, King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General. It gathered together representatives from all three estates. Unfortunately, the first and second estate, remember the clergy and the nobility, were unwilling to allow the third estate into the room because they knew the third estate's plan to fix the debt was by making all of the estates pay taxes based on how much money they had. This seemed like a fair system to them, but the first and second estate did not want to have to pay more taxes. Because of this, the third estate was locked out of the room and told to go home. Of course they didn't do that. This meeting had been held at Versailles Palace, which had many other rooms to choose from. So the third estate broke into a nearby room, which happened to be an indoor tennis court. While inside this room, the people vowed that they would not leave until they had created a new constitution. Therefore, this was named the Tennis Court Oath, and is the official start to the French Revolution.